what I plan to do is really just give you a flavor for what the city of Cupertino did back in 2018 and 2019 when we were looking at our reach codes. I have a little bit of background on reach codes in our green building arena as well. And then a couple of the considerations that we're thinking about in Cupertino when it comes to the next code cycle. So my name's Andre Duurvoort. I'm the Sustainability Division Manager in the city of Cupertino. We work as part of the city manager's office. So my presentation will be largely kind of policy focused and some of the considerations that we went through as we developed the policy. Some of the other presenters will probably have more detail when it comes to implementation and some of the nuances. So let me dive right in here. I always like to start with a little bit of history. I like to remind folks, especially when I'm talking to our local council and commissions, of just how important the codes are. There's really, of course, not a lot of understanding of the codes outside of our little world. And so I like to remind people that the first energy code in California was really initiated under Reagan, really in the early 1970s, response to global oil market pressures, and later on really enforced by the OPEC embargo in the late 1970s. And the effects are really clear. I think this is from a CEC study showing the relative energy intensity across the state. And it's just very striking. And so while California does have higher energy rates and prices than the rest of the United States, studies have shown that a large part of our state also enjoys relatively low energy bills. And so we try to put that in context here of codes and energy codes specifically as being extremely valuable to continue innovating on and very valuable for consumers. So what are our policy goals in the city of Cupertino? We have a climate action plan that was completed in 2015. That's typical of climate action plans, mostly focused on mitigation measures for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We also have a general plan sustainability element, also was created around the same time frame. We are a member agency of our CCA, Silicon Valley Clean Energy. They're a really important player, as you'll see a little bit later here. And Cupertino has really taken climate change seriously. The elected leadership has been very supportive of efforts, and most recently has signed on to a climate emergency resolution in 2018. And just this year in 2021, signed on to the Race to Zero. So that really puts us on a trajectory towards looking at carbon neutrality. And our draft goal right now is looking at carbon neutrality by 2040, as we're updating our qualified climate action plan right now. So that's a little bit of our policy context and some of the goals that we are looking at. A little bit more background here. In 2010, we adopted, I guess, what could be considered a reach code by adopting a local green building ordinance. And this green building ordinance was really centered around requiring Green Point rating or LEED certifications for most new and retrofit projects of a certain size. So that was pretty innovative, and I think it was pretty interesting to watch that be implemented over the years, and really just trying to stay ahead of the game when it comes to development and incorporating green features. In 2018, the City Council directed us to look at new reach codes, and this was really driven by a few things in the region. The push from our local CCA was really important, I think, as they began studying this all the way back in 2018. And in 2019, we were really accelerating the process with all of the jurisdictions in Santa Clara County. We're really accelerating the process of bringing these codes to consideration. So our council asked us to look at both our green building ordinance locally, as well as exploring electrification reach codes, which I'll spend most of my time talking about today. In 2019, we really kicked it off with a public process and some policy development. We worked off of a model code that was being developed by Silicon Valley Clean Energy, Peninsula Clean Energy, as well as BayREN, and a few consultants were involved as well. That was a really key to our process. Really, I'd say we were being pushed and pulled. We're being pushed and pulling at the same time. So it was a really fascinating process because the city of Berkeley at this time had just adopted the famous gas ban. And so I'd say that really generated most of the public conversation and energy behind this effort. And so from that point forward, we were really in hyperdrive, looking at all of our various jurisdictions in our area. Really, at one point in time, it was almost week to week. Some city council was considering this in our region. And there was just so much public conversation and buzz around this process. So it was quite exciting for someone like us to be involved in that process. In addition to the work that was done by Silicon Valley Clean Energy and others, we did engage a local consultant to help us with the public engagement process and to try to help us with further development and to take the model codes and see what would be appropriate for us in Cupertino. I'll talk a little bit more about the process, but the end of the story is that we adopted local reach codes, starting enforcement in the January 2020 code cycle. And now looking forward, we're in 2021 now. We're looking at new goals in our climate action plan for carbon neutral community by 2040. And so this is really going to inform our discussion around what the next code cycle should do. So how did we go forward with electrification in our reach code? We chose to place our reach code within the energy code. And we also made some modifications to our green building ordinance, which is contained within our local amendments to CalGreen. So those that's the choices that we made pretty early on. At the same time, as others have mentioned, there's been a few different approaches. The gas ban utilizing police powers rather than a building code was one example. We also, since we chose to go forward with the modification to the energy code, this needs to be found cost effective. And we had to prove to the CEC and others that we had done our homework when it comes to cost effectiveness, and also that our council was able to make relevant findings that this was a needed ordinance for conserving energy. So the scope that we chose to look at was new construction at the time of building permit application. I'll talk a little bit about some of the considerations that we have, why we went with a new construction scope. And the questions we were really asking ourselves, how do we mitigate emissions and climate impact of development for the next 3 years? This is really important for a city like Cupertino that's pretty much built out, has a relatively small amount of space for brownfield developments. And so we're looking at a lot of redevelopment coming up in the future. And so we thought that it was really important for us to put something in the building code to really mitigate emissions and hopefully reduce emissions over time as redevelopment occurs. And also, we're really concerned with market transformation. We wanted to make sure that there was ready solutions out there for builders and homeowners. We asked ourselves, what's really the level of flexibility that's needed in our code to make sure it can be enforceable and that people can comply with it? And also, what kind of stringency do we need in our local code to really drive further market transformation? So those are just a few of the things that we were considering. A little bit on the economics, we really wanted to have a strong economic foundation for our REACH code. And so we considered a few things. Of course, there's the cost effectiveness studies, which are extremely valuable, produced by the state and the IOU REACH code program. I assume everyone's familiar with those cost effectiveness studies, so I won't really dive into those too much. But in addition to those, we really were looking out to third-party expertise, and to try to gather as much data as we could around what's really economic for our community. So what we came up with is really that there's a lot of studies being done on this topic right now. And also the cost effectiveness studies at the time did not cover the full suite of building types that we were hoping to look at with our REACH code. So at the time, there was no high-rise model available, for example. And so in a way, we were trying to take advantage of the work that had been done, but to keep on track with the code cycle update, we did have to make a little bit of leaps and assumptions without having a state-created or a IOU-created cost-effectiveness study. And so we made some assumptions, but we also had some pretty strong evidence, for example, on the left showing studies that in new construction context, it in most cases really saves quite a bit of money on the development side. And so this is a pretty clear case, I think, that's been substantiated even further in recent years by further case studies that shows in a new construction context for us here in Climate Zone 4, it's really, there's really a lot of evidence to show that all electric new construction is the proper choice from an economic perspective as well as from a climate perspective. So that really pushed us towards looking at new construction and doing strong work in new construction. Our philosophy as well is really to stop the bleeding, as it were. I mentioned there's a lot of redevelopment occurring and will occur. And so the philosophy here is really just to stop the expansion of new gas infrastructure, and where at all possible, if there's a new, if there's a facility being torn down and rebuilt into something new, that's an opportunity for us to take out that gas line that was there. So really just stopping the bleeding of new infrastructure was important for us. I can't say that everybody was really 100% convinced that electrifying everything is the only solution, especially in the short term. So we think there needs to be more discussion on how to transition fossil fuel infrastructure in a much more responsible way. So in this case, we think that the evidence is super compelling that all electric new buildings are a great solution. And that as we're looking forward, we really need to be cautious and careful about what's doable and how far can we push, how far should we push in terms of requirements for retrofits. That's going to be a huge challenge for us to study. Another chart we like to show is that historically gas prices have been a lot more volatile in the United States and in California compared to electricity prices. So while we are concerned about electricity prices rising, especially in Northern California, we like to show that from an efficiency standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, electric buildings are lower cost to operate and as well as more stable from a budget perspective from the operator. And even with electricity price inflation, we think that's going to remain the case, that prices will probably rise slower over time compared to gas, which is historically extremely volatile. So those are some of the consumer-facing considerations that we had in mind. We also looked at the economics of new electric vehicle charging. This is a huge component for us in considering our transportation emissions, which are second only to emissions from gas used in the community. And so we're looking towards a huge expansion of electric vehicles in our community. We think this is going to happen naturally through market forces, but also through ordinances and local programs that we're planning for. So we're hoping for at least 20% market saturation by 2030. In our new climate action plan, we're looking at actions that may help accelerate that even further. So the basic thing that we found is that the building owner pays about 4 times more to retrofit an EV charger after a building is built. And so we were able to make the case to our council and community that requiring EV charging infrastructure as well as just basic circuiting is a good choice for us at the time of new construction. While you're pouring that concrete, it's a lot easier to run conduit and get the infrastructure ready for EV service infrastructure. So here's what we call the squiggle. This is the process we took. What was funny is that staff ended up taking the most conservative approach, and at each step of the public process really made our reach code a lot stronger. So I think this was a fantastic example of the public conversation that was happening at that time, and continues today, luckily, that there was a lot of activity. There's sort of this competitive nature of councils looking at each other, trying to see who's going to take that next step. And so this was just such an incredible public process to be part of, because as you can see here, starting with the model code options, we think the regional outreach did a lot. Even before we took up this item locally, there was regional outreach being conducted with builders, real estate community, the trades. So that was really critical, I think, to keep the conversation and kick it off. And also that our partners had allocated some local support from consultants to come in and help us make this argument to the community and have this conversation with the city council. So staff first proposed an electric preferred reach code with really no additional EV above and beyond what's in Calgreen today. That went through our Sustainability Commission, which is a body of residents that gives advice to the council. The commission received a lot of public feedback, a lot of organized public feedback, and a lot of people just showed up, actually, surprisingly, outside of the organized activists. Just normal people showed up, business owners showed up and expressed their thoughts, and we think that made this a much stronger process. So the commission at that time changed our recommendation to a mandatory electric reach code for new construction, and they added the electric vehicle reach code. And finally, that was revised and taken back to the city council. City council further strengthened the reach code by removing some of the exceptions, increasing the scope to all new building types, regardless of low rise or high rise, and also expanded the code to restaurants, which was originally exempted from our commission. So here's just a quick look at what our reach code looks like today. So essentially looking at all electric appliances inside the building, and including outdoor uses, specific outdoor uses such as outdoor fireplaces, and I believe swimming pools as well made it in there. For high-rise multifamily and other non-residential, we're looking at all electric required. There do remain some exemptions for certain use types. Essential facilities, hospitals, labs, and in those cases, when there's gas appliances being installed, there still needs to be a pre-wiring requirement. I believe that's it. So a couple things to note. So restaurants are still able to prove if there's no electric alternative, then they can get gas, but it's on the applicant to demonstrate that there's no alternative, and that decision gets made at the plan check process. Another interesting thing is that this does not address fuel used outside the building. So that's a limitation of using the energy code, is that really doesn't look at the big emitters in the area currently, which is diesel generators for emergency backup, and natural gas fuel cells are some of the other bigger emitters out there. So the community is asking what we can do about those sources, and that's going to be a consideration for us going forward. I'm going to wrap it up here real quick, just briefly on projects that have come through since our electric reach code has gone into place. About 100 new residential units. Many of those are ADUs, but a lot of them as well as are single family homes. There's about 75% of that is new single family homes considered new. So those are demolished an old home and built a new home, as well as a few duplexes. Only one new commercial facility has come under the reach code. It's an auto repair shop. I think that's in permit review right now. And one exciting one, a new mixed use development, which is going to be 295 living units, combination of townhomes, row houses, and senior living apartments. See that mid-rise facility there. And about 20,000 square foot of new non-residential spec space. So I'm really watching this mixed use development. Just got approved last month. and is going to be submitting for permits very shortly here. The spec space presumably is going to be some mix of retail, offices, and restaurants. I'm really curious to see if anyone applies for the restaurant exemption. I'm sure not. I'm not sure if they will, because these tend to be spec spaces, and the tenant's not going to be identified now. And so then there's really not any prohibition of adding gas later to the project. That's an interesting kind of nuance that I've been thinking about. So you're just looking at that economic expense, which is probably prohibitive. There's probably better options as well for an applicant, like just putting in a small propane tank or something of that nature if they really need a gas use. I'll wrap it up there.
Sorry to interrupt. We're running a little bit low on time.
Yep, sorry. So these are just our key success. I'll skip over that because I think a lot of you are familiar with this process. I just want to give a shout out to our legal counsel, which was awesome. Shoot Mahali and Weinberg was involved, a few other cities. That was really helpful for us as we went through the process. This is it. So what are we thinking about in the future? We're really thinking about equity and electricity prices. We anticipate a lot of sticker shock going forward as PG&E brings their prices closer in line with what the Southern California IOUs are doing. And we think that there's a lot of room for development in electric retrofits. So I'll wrap it up there, and thanks for your time.